Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are so happy to have you here for our discussion on emotional health and emotional labor during changing times. We do have a big group today. People are coming in from all over the country. We're so excited to have you here. I know people are still joining us, but we're at the top of the hour and want to respect your time, so we are going to get started. My name is Katherine Bergerson. I'm the Vice President of Marketing with Insightful. And on our agenda today, I'm just going to give a quick welcome, tell you a bit about us, then I'll turn it over to Steve Grimes, who's here with us, our keynote speaker, who's going to share on the emotional health and emotional labor. We'll have time for questions, and then we'll talk briefly about some next steps. So, a couple of housekeeping notes as we kick things off today. Wanted to let you know that this session is recorded and you will receive a copy via email after today. So we, again, are happy to take your questions depending on the format of GoToWebinar that you have. You may either see a gray bar on your screen. It looks like you can see examples here that may say questions or chat. Just open that up. Pop your question there, or you may see icons that look like the right side of your screen. Again, pop your questions in there. We'll pause and do our best to get to all of them. Of course, if we run short on time, we do commit to getting back to you in the very near future. Also in this area, you'll see handouts. You're welcome to download those now or anytime during the presentation. And now I'd like to just share a brief background about Newsbank and Insightful. Newsbank is a leading news and information provider that aggregates sources from all around the world, bringing you and your teams access to credible, vetted global sources, and many of which are unique to Newsbank and Insightful. All are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week from any device. And I'm proud to share with you that we have been a family-owned company for more than 50 years. Insightful is part of Newsbank's philanthropy division, and it's a software that draws on Newsbank's resources that helps nonprofits like yours fill in information gaps, learn more about donors and prospects in order to gain additional information and really to help promote better philanthropic engagement. Recently, we added 27,000 obituaries and death notices to our collection, and it's growing every day, and it makes Insightful the most comprehensive information resource available. And we believe it's just this simple. When you know more, you raise more, and you can deepen donor relationships to do more good in the world and meet your mission. So the reason that we are all here today is to talk about emotional health and emotional labor during changing times. And I'm so happy to introduce you to Steve Grimes. He is the Director of Prospect Research and Development with NAACP. I'm going to share some of his background. It's very fascinating. He started his career as a prospect researcher in 2006 at St. John's University. Then in 2012, moved on to academia as a doctoral student at Rutgers University, studying the sociology of emotions. Isn't that fascinating? And then in 2016, as a new administration was coming into the White House, felt perhaps the academic route wasn't quite the path for him and decided to return to fundraising as a prospect research analyst at the American Civil Liberties Union in their national office. Then in 2018, an opportunity became available to work at Jazz at Lincoln Center and became the organization's first Director of Development, Strategy, and Analytics. Then in 2020, the world changed, and at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, Steve was fortunate enough to be recruited by the NYC Mayor's Office as their Assistant Director of Data Analytics for the New York City Mayor's Office, where he was proud to serve his home as he is a native New Yorker. Fascinating background. And then wanted to return to something a little bit familiar, but different. Steve came back to fundraising as a consultant with the Helen Brown Group and served as the firm's assistant director of data insight. And now, recognizing that his strengths were best suited for more of a brick and mortar organization, Steve moved on to the Legal Defense Fund at the NAACP in 2023 as the organization's first ever director of prospect development and analytics. Wow, what a fascinating background. And when time allows, Steve enjoys reading, yoga, spin, hiking, and marveling about the amount of luck he has had during his career. And we're lucky to have you with us today. Please join me in welcoming Steve Grimes. Hey, Steve.
Hey, Catherine. Thank you. I appreciate you. All right. So I think I'm going to get now to share my screen.
Yes.
Yeah, give me 2 seconds, y'all. All right, there we go. Okay, this. All right, do you see my screen?
We do.
Excellent. So I'm just going to go ahead and do view and then slideshow, and perfect. All right, excellent. Lovely when technology works out. No, it's not. Okay, here we go. That's not what I wanted to do. Let's stay here. Okay, hey everyone. Thank you for attending. I first thank you to Insightful for having me here. They actually did not ask me to say this, but I'm going to say this anyway. I actually used Insightful over at Jazz and Lincoln Center. If any of you are on a call or prospect researchers or working in prospect development, you've done any sort of prospect alert work, Insightful is probably one of the best platforms to keep everything organized. If you were dealing with those Google alerts, if you were dealing with LexisNexis, any sort of email alerts, it's kind of funky to kind of keep track of everything. I really liked Insightful for the fact that it kept everything organized, which, as you know, when you're doing prospect alerts, takes a ton of time. So I just want to kind of just give a shout out to Sarah, who got me to like, she convinced me to actually do this. I didn't want to do this. Not to say that I didn't want to be here, but I wasn't sure I had anything to say. Thank her for just believing in me. So I appreciate her. Okay, so when I first started to think about this presentation, I wasn't exactly sure how to bring across this information. I know that what I wanted to do was have a presentation that was different than the ones I've given before. I've given a bunch of presentations on what it means to do data analytics within prospect research, techniques on prospecting, just various things on the operations and the logistics of what it means to work. And as I've gotten older in my career, I felt that it was necessary for me to start thinking about how to talk about things around work itself. I kind of want to give a presentation here that I wish I had when I first got into just working, not just in fundraising, but what it meant to just be at work. And just be told some of the the unsaid, taken for granted things that I kind of had to learn the hard way many times, actually, throughout many of the jobs that I've had. And I feel giving a presentation like this, particularly at the time that we are here now in our country, where we're about to see a significant amount of change, and things will be different, to essentially just talk about hey, what that impact has on you in your workspaces, on your emotions, on your identity. So as the weeks were going on, I actually was not sure I was saying what I wanted to say. I was feeling like I was not really being vulnerable, I think, here in sort of like the way I'm going to be explaining things, and I actually switched up a bunch. I was going to stay sort of in the logistic process. It was going to be much like one of the lectures I did when I was teaching, right? And I was like, I don't want people to like leave, and I don't want people to leave not knowing anything that I spoke about. So I kind of got everything down to be more simple. And I'm spending a decent amount of time in this presentation sort of talking about ways for us to find opportunities to be more authentic and genuine with our emotions while we are at work, particularly, again, considering the change that is going to be coming for many nonprofits over the next few years. So I felt like, that was a little bit more genuine and a little bit more human. And I think that is something that we need for ourselves, pretty much, right? All of society, we just need more opportunities to be human with each other, be open with each other, love each other, right? So I'm trying to do that here in this presentation towards the end. So I don't spend a whole lot of time, at least I don't think so, really kind of focusing on the details of like organizational change, emotional labor. I think it's more important for us to kind of spend a little bit more time about what do we do when we're dealing with sort of these dynamics. Okay, so I think I'll just start. And I think where we should start is just like to set the table of what organizational change is. Now, this is not my sort of breakdown of it. This was what I found online. It was super helpful just to kind of understand the ways we see organizational change. Look, as professionals, if you're sitting in this room, you have been dealing with organizational change pretty much your entire career. I think everyone knows what organizational change is, but I like the buckets that are given here about like what change looks like in an organization in various aspects. So you have strategic change. This is change to internal policies and processes. This is change that happens pretty frequently. A way forward isn't particularly working. Leadership may scale back, pivot. Pivot is one of those words that we use a lot, right? So strategic change is something that takes place pretty regularly. People-centric change, another change that takes place pretty regularly. These are new humans coming into the workplace, different HR policies, right? So that's happening at least once a year. And then those are not just changes for what takes place in the workplace, but what's going to take place at home, right? If your insurance is going up and insurance is taken away, that sort of thing, right? That's what is meant here by people-centric change. Structural change. This is shifts in management, chain of command, job structure. I would say this is the change that out of pretty much this and maybe technological change that is the most impactful in our jobs. This is a new boss, a new position that you now have to interact with, a new role that you are given, a completely different structure, right? That is a completely different, sometimes change of a department or of an organization. And then there's technological change. These are tools, right? The tools that you're used. So like anytime you have to do a CRM switch is a technological change. And, for those who have done CRM changes, the work that is involved here and what it means to essentially have a new database. Then there is unexplained change. I would say that this election is maybe an example of this for many. That change that takes place from unexpected events. We're not exactly sure what's going to be happening with the nonprofit world over the next probably year. There's going to be some significant things that are going to be put into place that we're going to have to essentially account for over the next over the next year or two. So this is going to be a lot of unexplained change. I would argue that this is the change that probably makes us most anxious, right? A CRM, we know the CRM is coming. Structural change, new boss is a new boss. New hires and new hires, and new strategy is a new strategy. But to not know the thing that's about to change probably is the most anxiety inducing for us. And then there's remedial change. And this is change that takes place because a problem has been identified. This is good change from my perspective. There is something that's not working within the organization, and everyone comes together as a team, or it is made it from a decision up top that like, hey, this is not working, we need to do something completely different, and to see if the problem works, right? So this is a bit of a generative change in a way, positive change in a way. Okay. And just in case you landed on this rock yesterday and you have no idea what we're talking about when we say emotions, I put this here just to kind of go through it. For the most part, this is really for me. I remember the first time actually looking at this and essentially going, oh, I did not know we can break down our emotions in this way. It's super useful, actually. I use something like this, not the exact thing, but I use something like this for whenever I have an emotion that I can't place. I think we've all sort of been there where we've had an emotion that just doesn't necessarily have a name for it, right? We're sort of like, what is that? And I like going through something like this to essentially go, am I, optimistic? Am I avoidant? Am I bored? Am I insecure? Am I hurt? And, at some point I say out the word of the emotion, and then it sort of clicks like, I am distant right now. For some reason or another, being distant is tied to angry. I am angry about something. What am I angry about? So like the emotion wheel here is super useful for like placing yourself, right? But it's also useful for kind of understanding the offshoots of emotion. 1 second, I want to plug in my laptop. There we go. I rather no light than my laptop falling off, going off of power. So hopefully you can still see me well. Right. So here we have like a tool that allows us to understand, our emotions, the outflows of our emotions from our main emotions. I'll also highlight here that the emotions that are here, the main emotions. So like the way to read the wheel would be the inner circle are your primary emotions, and the outside circle is sort of your secondary emotions. I would argue, and I have done this in the classroom, that what you actually really have is 4 different main emotions: fear, anger, happiness, and sadness. And that surprise or disgust or any other source of emotions are really the intersections of fear, anger, sadness, happiness, right? So I would argue, for example, that excited is more a happy fear sort of intersection than it is just surprise as something as an emotion, right? It's a response, but like I would not see this as an emotion. And I'll explain this a little bit later as we go into more of the slides. Same thing with disgust. Disgust to me reads as shame. And shame, for me, feels like a intersection between, again, sadness and fear. So, you'll see different types of emotion wheels that break out in certain ways with different primary emotions. And I've seen primary emotions go up to 8. But I think there is some utility with kind of focusing on sadness, fear, anger, and happiness as your primary emotions, particularly when you're trying to understand, hey, what is the emotion I am feeling right now? Okay. Let's do this. Okay. So why emotions? Why are we talking about emotions? Why are emotions important here? So when I used to teach this course when I was pursuing my PhD, I I talked about emotions as something that is more than just your feelings, right? It is more than just something that like is a sensation or a way of thinking or again a feeling, right? Emotions are external things; they are tools, right? So I always sort of like want to point people to understanding that emotions is the way that we communicate with ourselves and each other, right? So going back to the wheel where I'm like, I have no clue what emotion I'm feeling right now, and I go around the wheel and I just name out the emotions, and then I land on one that gives me the opportunity to go, oh, I think I'm okay. Yeah, this feels like the thing that I'm feeling right now. That second order emotion, but apparently that's tied to anger. Am I angry about something? Right. And I'm communicating to myself about, hey, I guess I am angry about something, which is again why I argue that there really should be four and not anything more than that. But that's neither here or there. And of course, you're not just communicating to yourself, hey, I am feeling this emotion. Um, and then like going down that rabbit hole. Um, you're also communicating to others, right? That you are feeling this emotion, right? So if you hear evolutionary psychologists talk about this, they will say things like human beings some point in time obviously did not have the way we think about emotions that we do today. And we essentially evolved, right, to be able to kind of incorporate emotions into our day to day. And they use, and they have the proof around this is that, like, if all of humankind evolved from, places where there were predators who would eat them whenever they got the chance, right? There was something that humans needed over those predators to essentially separate themselves and to protect themselves and protect their communities, right? So the whole idea here is that as we evolved, we got more and more complex with our emotions, which allowed us to communicate danger, which allowed us to communicate sadness, which allowed us to communicate fear, which allowed us to communicate happiness, and all the major emotions. And it communicates in that communication. What then happens is that it creates for shared meaning, right? We get opportunities to understand, oh, you feel the same thing I do. You must not be a threat to me. We should stick together because, there's a big cheetah out there that's going to like just jump out at us at any moment and just drag us into the bushes, right? And we essentially did more and more and more of that, which allowed us to understand our identities, and the world around us, right? And understand, hey, this is a thing that is going to be safe for us. This is a thing that's not going to be safe for us, right? It allowed us to create society. It's the reason why we are here today. It is the reason why we have all the tools in front of us that we do, our computers, our computer chairs, our tables, our coffee, the music behind us, the TV around us, the lights. All these things come from the fact that we are communicating to each other. And the thing that is universal to us as human beings are our emotions, right? It's the one thing that, like, when we don't have, we tend to look at an individual when they are devoid of emotions as broken in ways, right? That they are not going to be able to click into anything if they are unable to just like exhibit emotions, right? So emotions allow us to create a shared reality for ourselves with each other, and they allow for stability, right? When I know you're sad, I know what I can do when you're sad, right? Or when I know that you're sad, I know that you may not necessarily want to be sad, right? Because I've been sad and I don't think you want that. And when you're happy, I think I know you want to be happy, right? And like we're making tons of assumptions here when we're, engaging with people's emotions, right? But for the most part, we are many times correct in our assumptions, right? And we, again, build systems out of this, right? And then, again, it allows for stability. As you can imagine, when we are now put in environments and situations where the change that is taking place is one that does not now allow for us to communicate emotions appropriately, right? The stability goes away. The ability to communicate with each other goes away. And the ability to communicate with ourselves go away. And this is where sort of the self-care aspect of things are, your well-being aspect of things are, your emotional health aspect of things are, right? Because it's never just, oh, I am unable to communicate with someone. Oh, it's never just, other people are having emotions that are different than mine. It's never just, there's tons of change happening. There is an instability, a destabilization that takes place with our identities when we are faced with significant amount of change that does not align to does not align to the emotions we want for ourselves and the emotions that we're getting from other people, right? And again, like, I wanted to make this presentation, like, to kind of talk about this because I feel like it's one of those unsaid, taken for granted sort of mechanics of like our work that we don't do enough to like truly talk with each other about. We sort of like, we sort of assume that like everything will just sort of work out. Or, in many of our workspaces, we sort of devalue the aspect of what it means to be emotional, right? Think about what it means to be a professional. I've had great difficulty with what it means to do the professional thing, right? Look at me. I got a sweatshirt with a dog on it, right? Look at the way I talk. Look at the way I engage with people, right? I don't do the buzzwords. I don't do the button up. I'll be like this between 9 and 5. And I don't do it because I can't do it well, right? So like, there is something to be said about creating spaces for people like myself, who struggle with what it means to then communicate with people because they're not necessarily giving the emotions that work for what your many of your workspaces essentially highlight and say that is the right way to act, right? Which is sort of like with no emotion. All right. So then what happens is with organizations that now have significant amount of change, right? It comes up against sort of the reality of the fact that like we're all human beings and we don't want to get eaten by the cheetah, right? So we now have situations that destabilize us and the emotions don't have a place to go, right? I like to think of emotions really as cosmic energy, right? I mean that genuinely. If we are all made of the universe, for example, right? And we all have some lineage back to the stars in some sort of way, right? Why can't our emotions be our cosmic energy? It's the reason why it affects us so much in the way it does, right? Because it just feels so unexplained, right? And I mean, yes, we can talk about it as it relates to chemicals and this part of your brain and that part of your brain, but like, yeah, I don't know, when I'm feeling happy and I'm truly joyous, right? Yeah, that might be some chemicals, but there's definitely something else in there, right? So, like, our emotions are hard to ignore, right? And when change now comes and rustles our emotions, right? In spaces where emotions are sort of controlled in these sort of ways, right? We find ourselves really sometimes in great distress, right? It is one of the huge causes of burnout. It is one of the huge causes of depression, right? Because folks' identity completely fall away here, and they now have to rebuild it in some sort of way, right? So my hope here was to be able to create a presentation that sort of like talked about this underlying taken for granted nature of our emotions in a way that like really unpacks it. Okay, I just want to get a quick check of time. All right, so we're about halfway in. Perfect. Okay, so we're going to spend the other half essentially talking about emotional labor as Arlie Hochschild has given the theory. Emotional labor, as it stands now as a theory, has been revised and added upon and nuanced. Arlie Hochschild is the one who essentially created the theory. The theory as it stands today isn't much different than how Hochschild sort of conceptualized it. She conceptualized it as an addendum to sort of Marx's theory around capitalism, and recognized that Marx did not have anything in his theory that talked about emotions and how emotions are sort of like this foundation for so much of this progress that is required in capitalism, right? So she wanted to essentially kind of like add that to sort of Marx's viewpoint. So it's a Marxist theory in a way. In talking about emotional labor, she is also talking about emotional management, and she's contrasting the two things. She's saying emotional labor happens in a public space and emotional management happens in a private space. And emotional management is something that you have agency over, relative agency over. You have relative choice in comparison to emotional labor, which takes place in the public space. And we'll get to that in a second. So emotional management is how we authentically modulate our emotions and direct our feelings based on social structures and institutions that we are a part of. That authentic is important, right? That authentic means that like you have, again, some sort of choice in what you do with your emotions in a given situation. Again, she's talking about emotional management as a thing that just happens to us in our second to second, breath to breath sort of moments when we are with ourselves, when we are with others, more or less anytime we are outside of work, right? Hochschild uses the term feeling rules to describe norms about the appropriate type and amount of feelings that we should put into any given social situation, right? I have a diagram here to kind of show this. Hopefully it is clear. But ultimately, she's saying that like we have social conventions about what it means to give the appropriate amount of expression, the appropriate amount of words, the appropriate amount of feeling, right, in any particular given situation, right? Like going back to my point, like I've never been a particularly very professional in my very professional jobs, and it's gotten me in trouble many times, right? Because I wasn't doing the feeling rules thing, right? So that's a really good example of that, I guess. Choice is key in these spaces, right? Where we are authentically modulating our emotions. The ability to have choice is key in this concept. Again, this is different than emotional labor. Okay, so here's sort of a diagram of what that looks like when it comes down to emotional management, right? Here we have two individuals, two human beings. They are engaging with each other. The human being on the right has had something unbelievably great happen to them, right? Okay, I have an example. Last year, I ruptured my Achilles. I was trying to be young on the basketball court. I've learned I can no longer be young on the basketball court. I need to stay away from any sort of basketball courts. And for months after, I was wearing a boot. Every time I saw someone with a boot, while I was out, wherever I was out, whenever I had the opportunity to go out, they looked at me, I looked at them, and there's always this sort of like look that we gave each other of like, hey, what are you in for? Right, and like it great made for great conversation, right? But like the boot represented an emotion for us, right? Because it was one of those things where like we just looked at each other and went, this really sucks, right? Don't you want to go outside and play? This happened to you because you were trying to play, weren't you? And I was like, yes, I was trying to play. What was you? I was skiing. Me, it was basketball, of all things, right? So like now when I was able to essentially get this boot off, I had immense joy, right? And whenever I now talk with anyone who's had a boot, right, who's been in a situation like that, or, you know, in the orbit of a situation like that, they immediately know what I'm talking about, right? They immediately understand. Even if you've never had it happen to you, right? You can look at this and go, man, that sucks. It's raining right now. And here you are with this boot walking through the street, right? So let's say the person on the right is an individual who just got their boot off. They're feeling great, right? They're like, yep, I can go out now and do things. And the person on the left is getting the story, right? And now gives a certain amount of reciprocation to the emotions that are being had by the person on the right. That person on the left is smiling, engaged, happy for the person. They're not angry, right? That's not the emotion that you want to give here. They're not sad. They're sharing in the happiness, right? And they're both pulling from social norms, social conventions to essentially get them to a point where they are sharing this experience together and creating a shared reality. They're creating some stability between them, right? You see the arrows there for social norms, and the floating faces are pointing up to the floating faces and then down to social norms. The idea here is that the individual emotional exchange can also change social norms. It takes a while, right? I don't imagine many people today are walking around in their offices with a dog on their a dog sweatshirt, but the hope is within 100 years like we would do that, right? So things change over time, right? So this is like what that is sort of trying to show there. All right, and then you have emotional labor. So this is how feelings are managed in the workplace, where one's emotions are heavily controlled based on the power dynamics of the profession. Choice is relatively absent here, right? This and the heavily controlled part comes from the wages. This is why this is a Marxist theory in a way, right? This is about what wages do to our souls, so to speak, right? This usually takes place in two ways for us. Surface acting, when you only portray the required emotion on a surface level, and deep acting, when you want to try to summon the emotion you want to portray by actively engaging in thoughts and activities that foster the emotion. Changes in work structure make this process tenuous. So the idea here is that when we are in a workplace, particularly when we begin doing the job, when we've just started doing the job, we're new at it, we're just now getting the lay of the land, we're getting ourselves acclimated, that is going to be a point of great sort of destabilization, right? We don't know, there's uncertainty, there's a lot of stuff going on that we don't fully understand. So what we want to do as human beings is get to a point where we are stable and we understand like what are the types of emotions that I can do here that still get me paid, which is like always the priority in the workplace. Allow me to be who I am, which is usually the sort of the second thing, and then allow me to get the work done, right? Those last two sometimes are interchangeable depending on how passionate you are about the job. But for the most part, we always sort of land first, and it's sort of subconscious. We don't actively many times do this, but we recognize like, I want to get comfortable here as quickly as possible, right? Fear is a significant emotion for human beings. It is probably the motivating emotion over all other emotions, right? Sadness can be motivating, anger can be motivating, happiness can be motivating, but fear is instinctually motivating, right? Don't go here, go there, right? That kind of thing. So we want to be able to minimize this for ourselves. So what she's arguing is that we do sort of this process of surface acting to deep acting. Surface acting is where the most sort of uncertainty is. Surface acting is where the most sort of not being yourself is, right? When you are essentially saying, I see everyone acting like this, I guess I will act like this, whatever this is, right? And then at some point you start to get used to what this is, right? And then you start going, okay, I understand that we are, I don't know, let's keep it positive. We're happy here, right? What we do here is we are happy. Okay, great. How can I like really embody this happiness for myself where I don't have to like fake it, right? Where my boss doesn't come and I now have to smile because they're smiling and I don't know why they're smiling, right? Or, you know, there's a pep rally right now during the lunch hour in the break room. Not sure what's going on there, but like it's a pep rally. I guess I should go, right? You know, and at some point, these emotions, you want these emotions to sort of just be in the background. You don't want to be thinking about this. Like you just want to get your work done. You want to be able to express your authentic self. So you get to a point where you're like, okay, I need to start doing deep acting so that I can just be efficient at my job because capitalism asks you to be efficient, right? Even in the nonprofit world, right? So you now want to get to a point where you are doing things to essentially be happy, right? You bring plants into work. You make sure you get sunlight. You're always eating, wearing comfortable clothes, right? You're bringing your little knickknacks. And all of a sudden now you're like, yep, I got all the things around me, all the things that's like, it's almost like your little cocoon of like, this is the way I am going to show this emotion when I am at work, right? When we have significant change within our organizations, what then tends to happen is that we lose the ability to do the deep acting, to start getting ourselves settled, to get away from the destabilization, to get away from the uncertainty, to get away from the fear, right? Because surface acting is all fear. It's all uncertainty. It's all destabilization because we don't know why we're doing the emotion, right? Again, emotions are our cosmic energy. We know it intimately. So we know when we are in a space doing an emotion that doesn't work for what we want the emotion to be, or what the emotion really should be, right? We read that very well. Again, we've evolved for that, right? So change puts us in this place where we are now having to find ways to just do the bare minimum as it relates to connecting with other human beings. And you can imagine why that now starts to make it difficult to work with the people that you're working in, right? Let's look at it this way. One of my best jobs was at St. John's. St. John's was an interesting place for me. Love St. John's. Love everybody at St. John's, right? But the institution itself, they made some choices, right? I loved my job at St. John's. There was change left and right at St. John's. However, because I loved everyone at, oh, where am I here? Cool. Because I loved everyone at my job at St. John's, the change didn't matter, right? My deep acting was still connected. My deep acting was validated, right? Because I had people around me. I had a community around me that allowed me to be my authentic self, allowed me to just kind of do the deep acting thing and get my work done, right? No matter all the chaos that was happening to me or at the time when I was at St. John's, right? Hopefully we've all had opportunities like to have jobs like that, where things were just completely disorganized, right? But you worked around some beautiful human beings that just made it so much easier to be in that space. When you have change and you don't have that, right? You're now talking about places that are toxic, places that are taxing, places that you're unable to essentially work with. All right, I'm going to do another check of time. Where are we? All right, 15 minutes. Perfect. Okay, so I want to like give Hashal credit here because Hashal, that diagram that I showed a few moments ago actually doesn't do the credit of the complexity that Hashal has for her theory. Some of this complexity that you're seeing here is actually coming from emotion management and a bunch of other things that she's talking about. But just for the sake of example here, I'm doing it this way. I can hear my mentors my academic mentors yelling at me of like, you didn't add the thing. I'm like, no, just wait. I'm getting to a point. Um, so, you know, where before we had the individual on the left and the individual on the right, you know, just kind of interacting with themselves, with each other. Now they are in a place where they are interacting with all the other stuff that comes along with what it means to give emotions in the workplace. They, as you can tell, have a little bit of a derpy face because they're at work. You know, we're all a little derpy at work, right? So you have organizational change that will change the work structure. The work structure itself is going to impose itself onto individuals, right? To essentially say, these are the emotions that are appropriate in this space, particularly when your workplace is surveilled in various ways that we know sometimes it is surveilled, right? So the individuals still have agency. They're still able to pull from social norms, but the work structure is really kind of setting a hierarchy here, saying, no, 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 yeah, you know, it's great that you know, like the thing that you do when you go home or when you're with your kids or when you're with your partner or, you know, just like, you know, before you got here. But ultimately, we pay you to do a thing. So thus your emotions should be what we say it is, right? So there's a balance there that sometimes is many times uneven when work comes into play. And then you see on the side there, because now we have the person on the left, they are marked by their financial opportunities, their class, right? Whereas the person on the right is marked by their race, maybe, right? And then if the work structure is a very particular work structure, it is also affecting how those aspects, those demographics of those individuals actually then now go ahead and express emotion, right? A good example here is that like you might get along with someone who like in your neighborhood that you wouldn't have thought you would have had a great conversation with and engage with, right? And like, you know, you make the best of friends. But when you now are at work and you have rules to who you are and your role and your position, right? You might find it hard to now engage with that person if they are of a particular class, particular background, particular sex, gender, whatever the case may be, depending on the work structure, right? And now you chuck in organizational change into all of that. Of course, you're going to find, you know, us having difficulties with what it means to create meaning with each other. All right. So, what do we do about this? I try to cut down all of my slides here to not do all of the background. And I'm still like 10 minutes before I can actually give you the stuff of what you can do. So I'll breeze through it in a way, but I really don't want to. And like, I don't know, hit me up at some point. You'll get my contact information. I'd love to talk more about how we love each other more because like it's necessary. And you know, I want to give these tips, but I also, and this is why I have this slide, I also want to kind of just like make it clear that spaces matter, right? Our emotions matter. Yep, our emotions are like cosmic matter and all the things and all the things and all the things. But like there is something to be said about what it means to be in a particular space that, you know, serves as a filter no matter what to your emotions. So like I don't want to like leave you with going like, all right, yep, you know, organizational change is a thing and work structures are a thing and like you're going to be required to do X and Y and Z and everything is up to you, right? I don't want to like leave you with that sort of way of thinking about things. You know, this is another conversation for probably another time, but like at the end of the day, I want to just acknowledge the fact that like we can only do so much, right? And like we only have the tools to do so much, and those tools many times comes from the spaces that we are in. So just want to highlight that. But let's talk about some tips about how you can create some emotions to allow you to be a little bit more stable. Establish a standpoint. Find your authenticity in spaces where your workspaces are changing in ways that don't make sense for you. One of the things that I like to kind of use for myself now is recognizing that my workplace is not my community. But that doesn't have to be a bad thing. Think about when you travel somewhere, right? You're going some far off land. When you land in that place, how are you acting? How are you feeling? How are you looking at the people? How are you moving? Right? How are you just being present in that space? Right? You are respectful, giving deference. You are inquisitive. You are friendly. You are thankful, grateful, right, for having the opportunity to be in a community outside of yours, right? So I like sort of the idea of like having the standpoint of like, I am just a visitor here. I'm visiting for a long time, right? But I'm visiting. At some point, I will move on. And it is less about the moving on and more about where I stand right now in a space that is not my community, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to listen more. I'm going to be present with people more. I'm going to be a little bit more open. I'm going to want to learn as much as I humanly can, right? So that I can understand what this community is about. And in that way, you sort of grow what your authentic self is in the space, because you grow sort of in this holistic sort of way, right? Because you've identified that this is my standpoint. This has been helpful for me. Think about sort of getting a standpoint for yourself that allows you to figure out then what are the appropriate emotions if I am taking this standpoint for this particular space that I'm in. Breathe. You know, I've been given breathe as a tip in my life, like a life hack tip in my life, all my life. And I want to say in the past maybe 5 years since COVID, I have fully understood the power of breathing, right? Because breathing is less about breathing. It's less about air going in and out of your diaphragm. I am sort of keyed into like sort of my energies in ways, and like I'm gonna say it's not even about your energies, right? It's about practicing self-awareness, right? Practicing like what it means to feel your body, like exist, right? Placing yourself, right? So like in the last slide, we're talking about the standpoint. Here we're talking about, well, here's how you place yourself. Here's how you practice what yourself is in this space, right? It's been super helpful for what it means for me to have slow thoughts, because change comes quick, right? And when change comes quick, especially in an environments that we're in that are not ready to essentially deal with the impact and the reverberations of change, and from an emotional level, it is really important to be able to go ahead and go, hey, what is myself feeling right now? Am I tense? Is my stomach in knots? Can I not breathe through my chest? Am I breathing all the way through my diaphragm, through my body, through gravity? Am I doing that? Right? And that allows me to essentially go, right, wait, what am I feeling right now? Oh, I guess I'm feeling nonplus. What is nonplus? Nonplus is sad. I guess I'm feeling sad. Okay, great. Great to know. Why am I sad? I should work on that, right? Breathing helps me to do that. It is a great anchor point. Find your community, right? Yeah, it's not your community, but find your community in your community, in the community that you're not, that's not yours, right? Because you're going to visit, you're visiting somewhere. I am sure you are going to look for people or things or objects that represent your community in some sort of way. This might be family members, this might be friends, this might be a museum that you're going to, like it's like, it's all my stuff, this is my vibe, right? If you're like me, when I traveled to California last year and I was like, I should go play some basketball, right? Finding my community, right? And then busted my Achilles, right? So it's the same thing at work, right? Where what you're doing is you're trying to find people that allow you to have a generative relationship so that you can have that interaction that we had in that slide, that first slide between the person on the right and the person on the left. You create your own realities for yourself, right? I would say try to find the person who's the most positive at your job. Everybody has at least one of those people, right? engage with them, right? Use them as an anchor. When I say use them, don't use them. They're human beings, right? But like build a relationship with them if they're open with you when it comes down to something like that. Practice mindfulness. Learn to be present, right? This is, again, so important. I think mindfulness is different than what it means to breathe. Mindfulness is going, I understand what is happening here, and I understand what I am thinking about it, and I understand what that is doing to me and everyone else around me, right? Mindfulness is hard, right? If we were all mindful, this place would be so much better. We're not, right? So some techniques that I use for mindfulness are setting intentions every day. I set intentions every day. There's a word that I go ahead and have for myself on my calendar. Today, the word is, oh my gosh, I forgot. Yesterday it was stillness, right? And whenever something comes up, right? And like I'm feeling frazzled, I'm getting frazzled or feeling frazzled, I'll immediately go to my my intention and just go like, wait, what was my intention today? Well, my intention was stillness. Okay, I'm not feeling still right now. Oh, okay. How do I get still? And then I go through the down the rabbit hole of like what it means for me to go ahead and get my body still and my mind still. Another thing that's helpful with this mentioning stillness is taking transition points. Do not jump from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting. At least take 10 breaths before you go to the next meeting. It's not healthy for you, especially if you're doing it every day, over and over and over and over again, no matter how positive those meetings are, right? The constant outflow of emotion where you're not having an inflow of some sort is always going to be detrimental in some sort of way, particularly in changing organizations. I have others, but we're on time. So, look, the world's changing, stuff is going on, but I gotta imagine we still like puppies and kittens, right? So I just kind of want to leave this with everyone because, like, who doesn't like some puppies and some kittens? All right, so here's some puppies and some kittens. Hopefully this makes your day somewhat better because I know I love a good puppy. And here's my contact information, and I'm actually not sure where we are on time. I think I'm over, so apologies on that.
Not at all. Thank you. Thank you so much, Steve. Yes, we do. For those of you who need to jump, we understand, but we do have a few questions, so please stay if you can, and we will get a recording out to everyone. If there are questions, again, you may see a gray bar or some icons, open it up, pop them in there. But we do have a few to get us started. And one is...
So, Catherine, if you could do me the favor, talking about jumping from meeting to meeting, I have a 2 o'clock.
You do? Okay. Well, then we will.
So I can stay for 2 questions, and if we can get it out of here by 2:05, I will answer all the questions in sort of a lightning round. So let's see if we can get through it.
Okay. Here's Sarah, thank you very much for this question. In the absence of emotions or emotional vocabulary, I think this is going back to what you said, is it seen as unnatural, or what does it communicate when an organization's culture only allows for certain emotions?
Oh, that's a question. Right? I laugh because it's almost insane, right? Part of I think what happens with us as human beings, we are very terrified of what it means to engage with instability and meaning that it's not aligned. We're seeing this now in the backlash of what it means to be thinking about diversity work, right, and DEI work, right? That there is this fear of if we let other people with different opinions in, who knows what's going to happen, right? And no matter how much we tout this idea of like, a diverse team of diverse opinions and of diverse perspectives and diverse identities allow us to be in a place to be better, right? And to like not just better as human beings, but just the practical aspect of what it means to be affecting our bottom lines, right? It's difficult, right, to like be in spaces like this because they don't fully take that idea of that diversity to heart. So yeah, that's a place with bad juju.
Okay, so here's another, this is a good one, kind of tying back specifically to nonprofit work and fundraising, can be an emotional, it can often be emotional just by the nature of mission-centric work. How do you manage emotional expectations of donors or stakeholders? Is there a strategy that can help align donors' expectations with the realities of nonprofit work?
So going back to the idea that emotions are about communication, right? The idea here is less about the emotion and more about how we are communicating the emotion and the ways through which we communicate emotion. So what I have always advocated for any development department, if they haven't done this already, is to actually survey their constituents, their donors, and then in surveying their constituents and their donors themselves and constituents will give them words, the words of the emotions that they are tying to the organization, right? And then in the way then you now communicate back to the donors is you use those same words, right? And now you are in a place where you are sharing a reality with each other, right? And negotiating what those emotions are in that reality. So like, think about it less about it as emotions and more about the way we use it to like communicate with each other.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you. Oh, we got a nice comment from Desiree who said it was good she learned not to run from meeting to meeting, but she also had to go. Steve, I know you have to go too. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your valuable insights. We certainly appreciate you. So thank you very much.
I appreciate having the opportunity. Thank you again, Catherine.
Thank you. And for those of you who would like to know more about Insightful, we invite you back this time next week to learn more about information that your organization can't afford to miss. It's Thursday, November 21st at 1 o'clock. There is a link to register in this PowerPoint. You can download it now, or we will send you a registration link in our follow-up email that you should receive tomorrow, along with a recording of this presentation. So we hope you'll be back to join us for that. If you have any questions or if you think of something perhaps after the session today, don't hesitate to reach out to me or to Steve. We are happy to help answer any questions. If you would like a complimentary, personalized demonstration of Insightful, we can do that too. So on behalf of the Insightful team, we thank you for sharing part of your day with us. We'd love to know what you thought about today's session. There's a brief, I believe it's just a 2-question survey. I'd like to know your thoughts and how we can improve in the future. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us. We hope to see you back here next week. Bye.